At the height of America's Gilded Age, wealth no longer felt like money. It felt like permanence. Fortunes rose so vast they appeared to defy the oldest law of human history, that everything fades. Steel magnates built palaces of limestone and marble. Railroad kings owned private rail cars more luxurious than European royal coaches. Retail tycoons paid for skyscrapers in cash, as if gravity itself no longer applied to them. In that moment, America believed it had done something no civilization before it ever managed to achieve. It believed it had made wealth immortal. Names like Singer, Gould, Woolworth, and Frick were not spoken as businessmen, but as institutions. Their companies clothed the world, fed its factories, moved its cities, and reshaped daily life for millions. Their fortunes were so large that newspapers struggled to describe them in numbers. They were spoken of in metaphors: empires, kingdoms, dynasties, and like every dynasty before them, these families believed the same dangerous idea: that money could outlive blood, that wealth could replace lineage, that capital, once accumulated in sufficient quantity, could protect a family from time itself. But history has never been kind to that illusion, because dynasties do not collapse from poverty. They collapse from inheritance, from children raised in comfort but not purpose, from families that multiply faster than meaning, from fortunes divided into fractions until nothing remains large enough to matter. The Gilded Age produced wealth at a speed the human mind had never evolved to manage. Men went from obscurity to unimaginable power within a single lifetime, and in their rush to build empires, few stopped to ask the most important question of all: who comes after me? Some left their fortunes to dozens of heirs, assuming blood alone would preserve ambition. Others trusted that lawyers' trusts and contracts could substitute for wisdom. Many believed their children would simply figure it out, because money, after all, solves problems. It does not. Because money does not teach discipline, it does not create hunger, it does not produce vision, and it cannot protect against ego, resentment, or decay. And so, one by one, these American dynasties began to unravel. Not in a single dramatic collapse, but slowly, quietly, across generations, through lawsuits and family feuds, through poor investments and missed technological shifts, through wars, revolutions, and tax systems that did not exist when their fortunes were born. Their mansions became museums, their factories became ruins, their names faded from balance sheets and power circles, surviving only on buildings, plaques, and forgotten machines gathering dust in attics. This is not a story about failure. It is a story about inevitability. Because the Gilded Age did not create immortal families, it created a warning. Tonight, we will examine the great American dynasties that conquered capitalism itself, only to discover that wealth, no matter how vast, cannot defeat time, human nature, or history. These are the Gilded Age dynasties that went extinct. The Gilded Age did not happen by accident. It was engineered. In the decades after the Civil War, America entered a rare historical moment where nearly every force aligned in favor of extreme wealth creation. The nation was young, expanding, and violently hungry for growth. Natural resources stretched across an entire continent. Labor was cheap. Regulation was minimal. Competition was often crushed before it could organize. There was no income tax, no inheritance tax, no meaningful oversight. If you moved faster, built bigger, and crushed harder than your rivals, the system rewarded you without restraint. This was capitalism without brakes. Entire industries were born almost overnight. Railroads stitched together a continent that had never been truly connected. Steel transformed cities upward instead of outward. Oil replaced muscle and wind with fire. Manufacturing mechanized labor that had once taken days into minutes. Retail chains turned consumption itself into a mass experience. In this environment, one successful idea could scale faster than society could absorb it. A single invention could reach millions of people within a decade. A single merger could eliminate all meaningful competition, and a single man, operating in the right industry at the right time, could accumulate more wealth than European noble families had built over centuries. But the men who built these empires misunderstood what they were actually constructing. They believed they were building businesses. In reality, they were building systems. Systems that demanded constant reinvention. Systems that required ruthless adaptation. Systems that could not simply be inherited like land or titles. Unlike aristocratic wealth, these fortunes were not rooted in tradition or political power. They were rooted in innovation, efficiency, and relentless execution. And those qualities do not pass through bloodlines. The Gilded Age produced founders, not stewards, visionaries, not custodians, men who thrived in chaos but rarely taught their children how to survive it. Many of them came from poverty or obscurity. Their hunger was forged by necessity, their instinct sharpened by failure, their discipline born from fear of collapse. Their children inherited comfort instead. Raised in palaces, educated by tutors, insulated from consequence, many heirs never learned the skill that mattered most in a capitalist system, the ability to create value in a changing world. They were trained to manage wealth, not to defend it, to enjoy power, not to earn it. And while the founders were alive, the system held together through force of personality alone. But once they died, something invisible vanished with them. The discipline disappeared, the clarity dissolved. The empire became an asset instead of a mission. At the same time, the world itself began to change. Governments grew stronger, taxes emerged, labor organized, technology accelerated. Wars redrew borders and destroyed assumptions. The very conditions that had made these fortunes possible began to reverse. What had once been a perfect machine for wealth creation became fragile, exposed, and unforgiving. The Gilded Age dynasties did not collapse because they were foolish. They collapsed because the environment that created them no longer existed, and the people left in charge were not built for the new world. And no family illustrates this truth more brutally than the first dynasty we now turn to. A family born from one of the most transformative inventions in human history. An empire that clothed the world. A fortune that rivaled Rockefeller at its peak. Built by a man who could revolutionize industry but could never hold his own life together. This is where the Singer dynasty begins. Isaac Merritt Singer was not born into wealth, stability, or privilege. He was born into fracture. In 1811, in a small New York household, Singer entered a world where survival depended on endurance, not inheritance. His father was a German Jewish immigrant who had shortened his surname to blend into American life. His mother left when Isaac was only 8 years old, packing her belongings and disappearing from his childhood forever. That abandonment would shape everything that followed. Singer grew up restless, volatile, and obsessed with escape. By 12, he ran away from home. By his teens, he had discovered the theater and convinced himself that fame would deliver the validation stability never had. He joined traveling acting troupes, drifting from town to town, performing wooden roles that critics mocked without mercy. He failed repeatedly, but failure taught him something valuable. While living among stagehands and seamstresses, Singer absorbed mechanical knowledge almost by accident. He learned metalwork. He learned how machines failed. He learned how small improvements could transform efficiency. And when his acting dreams finally collapsed completely, leaving him homeless and desperate, Singer did what many broken men never managed to do. He reinvented himself. In 1851, inside a cramped Boston repair shop, Singer encountered an early sewing machine that barely worked. It jammed constantly. It broke thread. It was slow, unreliable, and commercially useless. Most people would have walked away. Singer did not. In 11 feverish days, he redesigned the machine almost entirely. A vertical needle, a foot-powered treadle, a tension system that allowed continuous stitching. What had once managed 40 stitches per minute suddenly delivered 900. It was not just an invention, it was a revolution. For the first time in human history, sewing could be industrialized. Garments that once took 60 hours of hand labor could now be produced in minutes. Domestic labor changed forever. Factories multiplied. Households transformed. The Singer sewing machine spread across continents. But Singer's true genius was not mechanical. It was commercial. He pioneered installment payments, allowing working families to buy expensive machines over time. He sent demonstrators door to door, letting people touch the future before purchasing it. He partnered with ruthless legal minds to crush patent challenges and dominate competitors. By 1860, Singer controlled nearly 40% of the global sewing machine market. At his peak, his personal fortune exceeded $13 million, hundreds of millions today. His company operated factories on 3 continents. His name became synonymous with progress itself. And yet, behind this staggering success, Singer's personal life was unraveling into chaos. He lived with multiple women simultaneously, married some, abandoned others, maintained secret households, produced children at a pace that rivaled his factories. By the end of his life, Isaac Singer had fathered 24 children with at least 4 women, many of them overlapping, many of them hidden from one another. The man who perfected the machine that stitched fabric together could not stitch a family. When his deceptions finally surfaced, they exploded into public scandal. Singer was arrested for bigamy. Lawsuits followed. Relationships shattered. He fled to Europe to escape both legal consequences and emotional responsibility. By the time Isaac Singer died in 1875, he had built one of the greatest fortunes in American history. But he had also built something far more dangerous: a dynasty without cohesion, a family without loyalty, an inheritance designed to collapse under its own weight. The empire was complete. The unraveling had already begun. When Isaac Singer died, the real conflict did not begin in boardrooms or factories. It began in courtrooms. Singer left behind a fortune vast enough to support an empire, and a family so fragmented that no empire could survive it. His will attempted to impose order on a lifetime of disorder. Some children were recognized. Others were excluded. Some mothers were rewarded. Others were erased. What followed was inevitable. Lawsuits erupted almost immediately. Sons sued brothers. Daughters sued estates. Former partners sued for recognition. Lawyers circled the fortune like scavengers, billing relentlessly as the family turned inward on itself. Years passed, then decades. Money that could have been reinvested into industry was burned on legal warfare. Millions disappeared not through extravagance, but through attrition. Each ruling split the fortune further. Each settlement diluted what remained. The Singer wealth did not collapse in a single catastrophic moment. It leaked away slowly, relentlessly through human conflict. By the turn of the 20th century, the Singer family was no longer unified by ambition or vision. It was unified only by resentment, and the mathematics of inheritance finished what ego began. 24 children became dozens of heirs. Dozens became hundreds. Each generation divided the fortune further, until no individual share remained large enough to dominate industry or shape strategy. Ownership fragmented. Influence dissolved. Control slipped from family hands into professional management. The Singer Manufacturing Company continued to operate, but the Singer dynasty no longer ruled it. At the same time, the world Singer had conquered was changing faster than his heirs could adapt. New competitors emerged. Technologies evolved. Labor costs rose. Political scrutiny increased. What had once been a revolutionary advantage became an industrial standard. The heirs were rich, but they were not builders. Many retreated into European high society, spending their inheritance on estates, art collections, and status. Others drifted into idleness, sustained by dividends rather than driven by purpose. Very few understood the business that had created their wealth, and even fewer cared to master it. And then history delivered its next blow. The 20th century arrived not as a continuation of the Gilded Age, but as its correction. Governments expanded their reach. Inheritance taxes appeared. Antitrust laws tightened. Wealth concentration became politically dangerous. The old rules no longer applied. The Singer fortune, once protected by legal innovation and market dominance, now faced forces no family lawsuit could outmaneuver: war, ideology, revolution. As Europe descended into chaos, Singer family estates were seized by Nazi occupiers. Factories were confiscated. Art collections were looted. In Russia, communist nationalization erased private ownership entirely. Generations of accumulated wealth vanished overnight behind ideological decrees. By mid-century, the Singer dynasty no longer resembled a ruling family. It had become a scattering of individuals connected by surname alone, their once unimaginable fortune reduced to memories, property sold, companies restructured, and influence extinguished. The empire that clothed the modern world still existed in name. The dynasty that built it did not. But within this collapse, one heir would choose a radically different path. One who rejected empire, rejected accumulation, and transformed what remained of the Singer fortune into something wealth rarely becomes: a legacy that survived. While the Singer dynasty fractured under lawsuits and inheritance mathematics, one heir stepped deliberately away from the ruins. Winnaretta Singer did not try to repair the empire. She did not attempt to reclaim control. She did something far more radical. She abandoned the very idea of dynasty. Born into unimaginable wealth, Winnaretta grew up surrounded by privilege, yet alienated from the world that privilege demanded she inhabit. From an early age, she understood that the expectations placed upon her were incompatible with who she was. She was a woman in a patriarchal world, an intellectual in a society obsessed with appearances, and a lesbian in an era that demanded silence. Where others used money to dominate, Winnaretta used it to disappear. She married into European aristocracy, not for romance, but for protection. The title gave her independence, the distance gave her freedom, and the fortune gave her something no artist of her era could easily obtain: time. Rather than invest in factories or real estate, Winnaretta invested in people. She became one of the most important patrons of modern music at the precise moment when tradition was breaking apart. Claude Debussy, Maurice Ravel, Erik Satie, Igor Stravinsky, composers whose work was dismissed as radical, dissonant, and dangerous, found refuge under her roof. She funded performances others feared to stage. She commissioned works no institution would risk supporting. She hosted salons where innovation was protected from ridicule by wealth that asked for nothing in return. But Winnaretta's transformation of money went beyond art. As Europe descended into war, she redirected her fortune toward survival. She financed mobile X-ray units with Marie Curie, bringing medical technology to battlefields where thousands would have otherwise died unseen. She funded housing projects for the poor in Paris, designing them not as charity slums, but as dignified living spaces meant to restore stability to fractured lives. Winnaretta understood something her ancestors never did: that wealth without meaning corrodes, that accumulation without purpose poisons, and that legacy is not measured by balance sheets. When she died in 1943, much of her fortune was gone, but unlike her family's vanished empire, her influence endured. The music she protected became the foundation of modern composition. The social projects she funded reshaped approaches to public housing and healthcare. Her name survived not as a tycoon, but as a patron of human potential. The Singer dynasty failed as a financial empire, but through Winnaretta Singer, it achieved something far rarer. It mattered. And yet, while Winnaretta transformed wealth into meaning, another heir chose the opposite path. One who chased pleasure instead of purpose. One who believed inheritance could buy paradise itself. His name was Paris Singer, and his story would complete the downfall of the Singer fortune. If Winnaretta Singer turned inheritance into meaning, Paris Singer turned it into fantasy. Paris was born into wealth so vast that reality itself felt optional. While earlier generations had been shaped by scarcity, Paris grew up insulated from consequence. Money did not represent labor or risk to him. It represented freedom, pleasure, reinvention without responsibility. Unlike Winnaretta, Paris did not reject the family fortune. He embraced it completely, convinced that wealth could be transformed into something permanent if it were beautiful enough. At the turn of the 20th century, he found his canvas in Florida. Palm Beach was little more than undeveloped coastline when Paris Singer arrived. He envisioned something no one else could yet see, a tropical playground for America's elite, designed to rival the great resorts of Europe. He poured money into land, infrastructure, and fantasy with extraordinary speed. Roads were built. Clubs rose from swamps. The Everglades Club became the epicenter of luxury, attracting industrialists, financiers, and socialites escaping northern winters. For a moment, Paris Singer appeared brilliant. Palm Beach flourished. Property values soared. His developments redefined American leisure culture. The wealthy followed his vision south, and with them came prestige, attention, and capital. But paradise, like Dynasties, requires discipline to survive. Paris financed his ambitions with debt, assuming growth would always outrun risk. He believed demand for luxury was infinite, and that his inheritance could absorb any temporary losses. He ignored warnings. He dismissed accountants. He trusted optimism over arithmetic. Then the illusion shattered. In the mid-1920s, Florida's real estate market collapsed with astonishing speed. Land values evaporated. Buyers vanished. Credit froze. Projects stalled, half-finished under the sun. Paris Singer found himself trapped inside the very paradise he had built, watching his fortune bleed away with every unpaid loan. The crash was merciless. By the time the Great Depression followed, there was nothing left to save. Paris lost his holdings, his clubs closed, his reputation collapsed along with his finances. The man who had once defined luxury fled the ruins of Palm Beach quietly, stripped of both wealth and influence. Unlike the titans of the Gilded Age, there would be no second act. He died in 1932, nearly penniless, largely forgotten by the society that once revolved around him. Paris Singer had done what generations of empire builders fear most. He spent the future. With his downfall, the last illusion of the Singer dynasty dissolved. Winnaretta had transformed wealth into culture. Paris had transformed it into spectacle. Between them, the fortune that once reshaped the world was gone. But the Singer family's collapse was not yet complete, because history itself had one final lesson to deliver, a lesson no amount of wealth could escape. The Singer dynasty did not die from extravagance alone. It was erased by history. No balance sheet can defend against ideology. No trust fund can negotiate with armies. And no family fortune, no matter how vast, can survive when the rules of ownership themselves are rewritten. By the 1930s, what remained of the Singer family wealth was no longer concentrated in factories or cash, but in European estates, art collections, and inherited property. Assets that once symbolized refinement now made the family visible, immobile, and vulnerable. Then the world collapsed. As Nazi Germany expanded across Europe, private wealth became a target. Singer properties in occupied territories were seized without negotiation. Mansions were requisitioned for military and administrative use. Art collections were catalogued, confiscated, and sold to finance the machinery of war. Generations of cultural accumulation vanished into black markets and state vaults. In France, Singer residences were converted into Gestapo headquarters. In Germany, family holdings were absorbed by the regime. What could not be looted was destroyed. What could not be seized was abandoned. At the same time, in the East, another force was at work. The Bolshevik Revolution had already delivered its verdict on private ownership. Singer factories operating in Russia were nationalized outright. Compensation was irrelevant. Appeals were meaningless. The concept of inheritance itself was declared obsolete. Entire branches of the family's economic foundation disappeared overnight, erased not by mismanagement, but by decree. When the war ended, the map of wealth had been permanently altered. Survivors returned to properties they no longer owned. Records had been burned. Legal claims dissolved under new governments. The old world of private dynasties had no place in the post-war order. Taxes soared. Capital controls tightened. Political suspicion followed large fortunes wherever they remained. The Singer name survived in fragments, in memories, in museums, in abandoned machines bearing a once famous logo. But as a dynasty, it was finished, and the Singer family was not unique. What happened to them would soon repeat across American wealth. One dynasty would collapse by excess. Another would dissolve by choice. Another would fade through irrelevance. Another would fracture under its own cleverness. The Gilded Age had produced giants. History was about to reduce them all to case studies. And next, we turn to a man who saw this coming and chose a different ending. Henry Clay Frick. Henry Clay Frick did not believe in dynasties. He had watched them rise too quickly. He had seen how ambition softened into entitlement, how hunger turned into indulgence, and how fortunes dissolved under the weight of their own success. Frick understood something most Gilded Age titans refused to accept. Wealth attracts decay. Frick rose from obscurity through coal, coke, and steel, industries as brutal as the man himself. He was efficient, disciplined, and unapologetically ruthless. His partnership with Andrew Carnegie helped construct the backbone of American industrial power, but it also stained his legacy with blood. The Homestead Strike of 1892 left workers dead, unions crushed, and Frick permanently branded as a villain of labor history. But unlike many of his contemporaries, Frick did not romanticize his wealth. He collected art obsessively, not as status, but as preservation. Paintings, sculpture, furniture, objects meant to outlast the chaos of industrial capitalism. As his fortune grew, so did his distrust of what it could do to a family. When the time came to plan his estate, Frick made a decision that shocked high society. He refused to build a dynasty. Instead of concentrating wealth across generations, he dismantled it deliberately. His vast art collection was placed into public trust, forming what would become the Frick Collection, one of the most important cultural institutions in America. His New York mansion was converted into a museum, ensuring that his wealth would be viewed, studied, and preserved rather than multiplied. His children inherited comfort, but not control. They were encouraged toward education, medicine, science, and public service rather than finance. None were groomed to dominate industry. None were positioned to command an empire. The Frick fortune was allowed to shrink naturally, absorbed into institutions rather than lineage. Critics called it wasteful. Others called it enlightened. Frick saw it as protection from family feuds, protection from political backlash, protection from the slow moral corrosion that afflicts inherited power. By removing his descendants from the center of capital, he spared them the inevitable collapse that had consumed families like the Singers. The Frick dynasty did not fall. It ended, quietly, intentionally, without scandal. In doing so, Frick demonstrated a truth the Gilded Age struggled to accept. Not all extinctions are failures. Some are choices. And yet, not every family chose restraint. Some allowed indulgence to replace discipline. Some mistook consumption for permanence. And few illustrate that mistake more clearly than the next dynasty. One that built an empire on pennies, only to lose it through pride. The House of Woolworth. Frank Winfield. Woolworth understood people in a way few industrialists ever did. He understood embarrassment. He understood aspiration. He understood that most consumers did not want luxury, they wanted dignity. At a time when store clerks judged customers by appearance and negotiated prices behind counters, Woolworth removed shame from shopping. 5 cents, 10 cents, fixed prices, open shelves, no judgment. It was a quiet revolution. Woolworth stores spread rapidly across America and Europe, turning small purchases into a mass phenomenon. He built wealth not by extracting maximum profit from each customer, but by welcoming millions who had been ignored. By the early 20th century, his company dominated retail. His name became synonymous with accessibility itself. In 1913, Woolworth crowned his success with a monument. The Woolworth Building rose over Manhattan as the tallest building in the world, a cathedral of commerce paid for entirely in cash. It symbolized the ultimate triumph of disciplined accumulation. Pennies had become palaces. But Frank Woolworth's genius ended with him. His heirs inherited wealth without understanding the psychology that created it. They lived extravagantly, disconnected from the rhythms of ordinary consumers. Retail to them was beneath their status. The stores were income streams, not missions. As the 20th century advanced, shopping habits changed. Suburbs expanded. Shopping centers replaced downtown streets. Discount chains optimized logistics and scale. Competitors like Walmart and Kmart learned what Woolworth's heirs refused to relearn, adapt, or disappear. Instead of reinvesting aggressively, the family retreated into comfort. Leadership weakened, strategy stagnated. The Woolworth empire became cautious at the exact moment retail demanded boldness, and the family's public image deteriorated just as quickly. One heir, Barbara Hutton, became a symbol of inherited excess. Her lavish lifestyle, multiple marriages, and extravagant parties during the Great Depression turned public admiration into resentment. While millions stood in bread lines, the Woolworth fortune was displayed as spectacle. It was a fatal mistake. By the late 20th century, the company Woolworth built could no longer compete. Stores closed. The iconic building was sold. The brand, once inseparable from everyday life, became obsolete. In 1997, Woolworth's American stores shut their doors for the last time. The dynasty that democratized consumption was erased by its refusal to understand consumers. Pennies built the empire. Complacency destroyed it. And yet, not all dynasties vanished through neglect or indulgence. Some fell because their founders were too clever for their own bloodline. The final dynasty reveals that intelligence, when hoarded rather than transferred, can be just as lethal as excess. This is the story of Jay Gould. Jay Gould was not admired. He was feared. While other Gilded Age titans built factories and monuments, Gould built leverage. He understood something fundamental about capitalism long before most of his peers. Ownership mattered less than control. He did not need to create industries. He only needed to dominate the choke points that kept them moving. Railroads, telegraph lines, financial instruments. Gould mastered them all. He manipulated stock prices with surgical precision, cornered markets, and bent entire sectors to his will. His attempted manipulation of the gold market nearly destabilized the American economy itself. Politicians despised him. Newspapers vilified him, yet none could stop him. Because Gould did not rely on public approval, he relied on intelligence. But intelligence is not an asset that survives inheritance. When Gould died in 1892, he left behind one of the largest fortunes in America. He also left behind a problem no legal document could solve. His empire was built on instincts, timing, and psychological warfare, skills that cannot be codified or delegated. His children inherited money, not mastery. They attempted to preserve influence through respectability. They married into European nobility. They sought social acceptance rather than financial dominance. The Gould name appeared in society pages, not financial headlines. Without Jay Gould's relentless pressure, the empire lost cohesion. Holdings were sold, control diluted. The aggressive tactics that had once terrified competitors became politically impossible in a more regulated world. Antitrust laws tightened, public scrutiny intensified. The era that rewarded manipulation was ending. The Gould fortune did not vanish overnight. It thinned. With each generation, influence weakened, capital fragmented. The family survived comfortably, even luxuriously, but no longer commanded the levers of industry. Their wealth persisted. Their power did not. Jay Gould had outsmarted markets, governments, and rivals, but he could not outsmart time. His genius had been singular, not transferable, and when it disappeared, so did the empire it sustained. The Gould dynasty did not collapse in disgrace. It faded into irrelevance, which raises the final question: why do dynasties die at all? The answer lies not in any single family, but in a pattern repeated across every one of them. And it is a pattern that continues today. Dynasties do not die randomly. They follow patterns. Across the Singer collapse, the Frick withdrawal, the Woolworth erosion, and the Gould fade. The details differ, but the structure remains the same. Wealth concentrates faster than wisdom. Power accumulates faster than responsibility. And money, once large enough, begins to distort the very environment that created it. The first killer of dynasties is multiplication. Founders are singular. Heirs are many. A fortune that feels limitless to one man becomes fragile when divided across dozens. Each generation splits ownership, attention, and purpose. Eventually, no individual holds enough control to make decisive moves. The empire becomes a committee, and committees do not survive competitive markets. The second killer is comfort. Founders are forged by necessity. Their children are cushioned by success. Hunger becomes optional. Failure becomes theoretical. Without pressure, discipline erodes. Risk feels offensive. Innovation becomes unnecessary. Wealth transforms from a tool into an entitlement. The third killer is identity loss. Successful founders build businesses around personal vision, but that vision rarely survives translation into rules and training. When the founder dies, the mission dissolves. What remains is an asset to be managed, not a purpose to be defended. Without shared identity, heirs drift toward consumption rather than creation. The fourth killer is environmental change. The Gilded Age rewarded speed, aggression, and consolidation. The 20th century punished those same traits. Taxes rose, regulation tightened, labor organized, technology accelerated. Political instability redrew borders and ownership rules. Fortunes built for one world were left exposed in another. The fifth killer is belief in permanence. Every dynasty studied believed itself different, smarter, more sophisticated, better prepared. Each assumed that legal structures, wealth managers, and institutions could substitute for human judgment across generations. History proves otherwise. No trust document has ever created ambition. No inheritance has ever guaranteed competence. No fortune has ever defeated time. Dynasties die when they forget that wealth is not a state of being, but a process. It must be defended daily against decay, irrelevance, and human nature itself. And when that defense fails, extinction is not dramatic. It is quiet. It looks like sold buildings, like diluted shares, like forgotten names, like influence replaced by memory. The Gilded Age dynasties did not disappear because they were weak. They disappeared because the conditions that made them powerful were temporary. Which leaves us with the final question. What does their extinction mean for the present? And are modern dynasties any different? Dynasties do not die randomly. They follow patterns. Across the collapse of the Singer family, the deliberate retreat of the Fricks, the slow erosion of the Woolworth empire, and the quiet fading of the Goulds, the details differ, but the structure is always the same. Wealth concentrates faster than wisdom. Power accumulates faster than responsibility. And once money reaches a certain scale, it begins to distort the very environment that allowed it to exist. The first force that kills dynasties is multiplication. Founders are singular, heirs are many. One vision becomes diluted across children, grandchildren, and extended families who share a name but not a mission. A fortune that feels infinite to one person becomes mathematically fragile when divided repeatedly. Control fragments. Decision-making slows. The empire becomes a collection of interests instead of a unified force. The second force is comfort. Founders are shaped by pressure, scarcity, and failure. Their children inherit safety. Hunger becomes optional. Risk feels unnecessary. Discipline erodes not through laziness, but through insulation. Without the threat of loss, ambition softens. Wealth becomes something to protect rather than something to grow. The third force is the loss of identity. Successful empires are built around a clear sense of purpose, often inseparable from the founder's personality. When that individual disappears, the purpose often disappears with them. What remains is an asset portfolio, not a belief system. Without shared identity, heirs drift. Some manage cautiously, others consume aggressively. Few create. The fourth force is environmental change. The Gilded Age rewarded speed, consolidation, and ruthless efficiency. The world that followed punished those same traits. Governments grew stronger, taxes rose, regulation tightened, labor organized, technology accelerated, wars and revolutions erased assumptions about ownership itself. Fortunes designed for one historical moment were suddenly exposed in another. The final force is the illusion of permanence. Every dynasty believed it was different, better prepared, more intelligent, more insulated from history. They trusted lawyers, trusts, and institutions to do what human judgment could not, preserve ambition across generations. They were wrong. No legal structure has ever created hunger. No inheritance has ever guaranteed competence. No fortune has ever defeated time. Dynasties die not because wealth disappears, but because meaning does. And when meaning is gone, extinction is not dramatic. It is quiet. It looks like building sold and names forgotten, like power replaced by comfort, like influence fading into memory. The Gilded Age dynasties did not fail because they were weak. They failed because the world moved on. And that leaves us with one final question. What does their extinction reveal about our own age? Every generation believes it is different. Today's fortunes are larger, faster, and more global than anything the Gilded Age could imagine. Algorithms replace railroads. Platforms replace factories. Capital moves at the speed of light, crossing borders in milliseconds. Modern dynasties believe they have solved the problems that destroyed their predecessors. They believe they are smarter, better advised, more insulated. But so did Singer, so did Woolworth, so did Gould. The truth history keeps repeating is simple and uncomfortable. Wealth does not disappear. It moves. When dynasties collapse, money does not vanish into nothingness. It flows into institutions, governments, competitors, and strangers who adapt faster than the families who once controlled it. What dies is not capital, but control, not assets, but identity. The Gilded Age dynasties were not foolish. They were products of a moment when speed outpaced wisdom, when growth outstripped restraint, and when men mistook personal genius for a permanent law of nature. They believed that because they had conquered markets, they had conquered time. No one ever does. History does not destroy dynasties out of cruelty. It does so out of indifference. It does not care how brilliant the founder was, how vast the fortune became, or how famous the name once sounded. It only responds to relevance. When relevance ends, extinction begins. Some dynasties fall loudly, in scandal and collapse. Others fade quietly, through dilution and neglect. A few choose to end themselves deliberately, converting wealth into culture, knowledge, or public good. But all of them, without exception, face the same truth. Money alone is never enough. It cannot transmit hunger. It cannot preserve vision. It cannot replace purpose. And without those, every empire eventually becomes a museum. The Gilded Age left behind monuments of stone and steel, but its greatest legacy was a warning written in vanished names, a reminder that wealth is always temporary, power is always conditional, and dynasties are far more fragile than they appear from the outside. The question, then, is not whether modern dynasties will fall. The question is how they will fall, and whether when the time comes anything meaningful will remain once the money is gone. Because in the end, history does not remember balance sheets, it remembers what mattered, and that is the final thread connecting every dynasty that ever believed it would last forever.